Hello and welcome to the Expert series by Magic Shop. For the uninitiated, Magic Shop is a mental health service which aims to create awareness about mental health. We try to debunk stigmas surrounding mental illnesses, and at the same time, we intend to provide a space for people to nurture their mental well being. Starting today, we have begun with something called the Expert Series, which is a new IGTV segment, and where we will be engaging in insightful conversations with experts from diverse fields. Now, the entire idea of doing this is to bridge the gap between diverse fields and the aspect of psychological well being.
So for our first episode, we are related to have with us gynecologist and IVF specialist, Dr. Parzan Mistry. So I'll give you a little bit brief about him, introduce him to you. Dr. Parzan Mistry is a consultant obstetrician gynecologist and infertility specialist practicing in Mumbai. He has done his MS in obstetrics and gynecology from the prestigious Grant Government Medical College and Sir J.J. Group of Hospitals, Mumbai. He has been awarded the Diplomat of National Board from the National Board of Examinations in New Delhi. Dr. Parzan Mistry has done his master's in reproductive medicine from London, UK, and fellowship in reproductive medicine from the Indian College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Dr. Parzan has been awarded the first prize for the best dissertation in the field of radiology and obstetrics and Dr. L.M. Shah Prize for the best paper in high-risk obstetrics at the Mumbai Obstetrics and Gynecology Society annual conferences. He has also been awarded the V for Sri Prize for best talk on contraception. Dr. Parzan has various publications to his name and has published chapters in various books related to obstetrics, gynecology, and infertility. Dr. Parzan has been invited as a faculty in various national and international conferences. So we welcome Dr. Parzan to talk about infertility and mental health today. And how do you feel, sir?
First of all, thank you, Ruhi, for a great introduction. Thank you, Sachi, for having me out here. I think it's very important for us, as gynecologists and IVF specialists, probably to be talking about mental health, because this is one aspect of infertility which we generally tend to forget and which we generally don't tend to focus on. So I think that's a very important topic which you all have brought, and thanks for introducing this topic, because this basically will help a lot of our patients to overcome the stigmas and any if they are facing any mental health issues and infertility especially, so probably they can get their doubts cleared.
Right. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being here. We've heard terms like infertility, PCOD, PCOS, and while we may be aware about these issues, at the same time, there are a lot of loopholes in our understanding of the same. And secondly, while we understand it might be really distressing for an individual experiencing this with respect to their physical health, what we tend to overlook a lot of times is the impact on their mental health. So that is what we intend to address in today's session. Firstly, our understanding of infertility, PCOD, PCOS, and secondly, trying to understand how does this impact a person's mental health.
Okay, so I think we are clear with the introductions and we can fire away with the questions. Okay. So, Doctor, the first question is, could you shed some light on, what exactly is infertility and how does it affect different genders?
So, Ruhi, first of all, what is infertility? I think that is something which, a lot of people generally, it's a very common term, but a lot of people do not mainly understand it. Infertility is quite a subjective term. There are textbook definitions for infertility, but in practice, the definitions change drastically. So those books mention that infertility is inability to conceive after 2 years of unprotected sex without any contraception use. The definition generally changes with age, because the same definition may be okay for a woman who is around 25 to 30 years, but may not be the same for a woman who is more than 35 years of age. Infertility around affects 10% of the population and 10% of the couples. Now, why we give this term of 2 years is because around 84% of the couples conceive within 1 year of unprotected sex. 92% conceive within the 2 years of unprotected sex, and that is why we are talking about the limit of 2 years. So almost 92% conceive within the 2 years of time. So anyone who doesn't conceive after 2 years is labeled as infertility. Now, though in Indian society, we tend to label infertility with basically it's a female issue, it's a female health related issue, which apparently is not true because the statistics say something different. Now, females contribute to 30% of the causes of infertility. The males contribute to 30%. So they both have an equal share. 30% of the times the problem is in both the male as well as female partners, and in 10% cases the cause is unknown, which we call it as an idiopathic or unexplained infertility, where we are not sure what the cause is. So I just want to break a myth or a barrier over here that it's only the female, out of the couple, only the female member who is labeled as infertile, which is not true. Males have an equal participation in this way. So around 30% of the causes, like I said, is related to females, 30% to males, 30% the problem may be in both.
Okay, so I think this is very important, like a very important finding for us to know, because again, we know stigma, we know the Indian society. So thank you so much for just starting with such a big number and statistic to help us understand. So what do you think are some of the causes we should be aware of when we're talking about infertility?
So when we're talking about the causes of infertility, basically first what we need to understand is we need to understand the process of reproduction, because without the process of reproduction, we cannot basically know what the causes of infertility are. So generally what happens is in one menstrual cycle, what we say, there is one follicle which tends to form in the ovary. Okay, and once this follicle matures, it reaches to a maturation stage, and then it ruptures out and the egg comes out. The egg comes and sits inside the fallopian tube. Once the relation is kept, the sperms enter through the cervix, go into the uterus, meet the egg inside the fallopian tube. An embryo is created over there. After 5 days, the embryo comes and sits inside the uterus, and that is how the pregnancy continues. Now, why I'm stressing on all these factors is because to have a normal conception or to have a normal pregnancy, we need to have normal ovaries, we need to have normal tubes, we need to have a normal uterus, we need to have normal sperm counts, and we need to have normal hormones in the body of the female. So basically, these are the 5 aspects where we generally test or where we generally check for where the problem is as far as infertility is concerned. And the causes of infertility are also pertaining to these 5 areas. So generally what happens to us is in nowadays cases, we generally get population with generally who are at a very advanced age. We get a lot of our patients coming to us at 35, 36 years of age in what we generally label them as poor ovarian reserve. What happens in them is, generally I tell my patients that males have a capacity to produce sperms even at the age of 50 to 60. But unfortunately, that's not true with female. Females are born with certain amount of eggs in their body. And as the period starts, each egg keeps on coming out. And as the age advances, the number of eggs keep on declining. And eventually the egg number drops. So we have a lot of patients coming to us with what we call it as poor ovarian reserve. That is one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is what we call it as the PCOS, which is the polycystic ovarian syndrome. So in PCOS, we have a lot of eggs in the body, but unfortunately, these eggs don't reach to maturity. They don't rupture, and that is why there is no pregnancy. On the other hand of the spectrum, like I said, is poor ovarian reserve, where there are not many eggs in the body. So these are the basic causes which happen inside the ovaries as far as the ovaries are concerned. The other causes are basically injuries to the ovaries because of certain surgeries. A lot of females have conditions called as endometriosis, whereas instead of having the periods go out through the uterus, the periods somehow finds its way through the tubes inside the ovary. There are chocolate cysts which form, which have to get operated, and that is where the egg numbers tend to decline. So that is one of the cause of infertility as well as the ovaries are concerned. As far as the tubes are concerned, tubes are mainly affected due to certain infections. Now, what happens is whenever there is an infection, the tubes tend to get swollen. Infections such as tuberculosis, certain bacteria and viruses cause diseases of the tubes. There is chlamydia, which swell up the tube, result into filling of tube with pus or exudates, and that is where the tubal blocks set in. That is, the tubes get blocked, and so if the tubes are blocked, the sperm is unable to meet the egg, the embryo is unable to travel to the uterus, and that causes infertility. There are other causes which set in the uterus, like certain tumors, like fibroids. polyps, which are small growths inside the lining of the uterus, adenomyosis. Then we have the hormone disturbances in females like thyroids, prolactin. So that is as far as the females are concerned. Well, male infertility is concerned, again, it is multifactorial. Male infertility can also be linked to poor lifestyle, like stress, smoking, alcohol, regular saunas and steams. A lot of males are going to gym, so increase of steroid uses causes male infertility, which is commonly seen these days. There is something called as blue balls or varicocele, that is the dilatation of the blood vessels around the testes, which decrease the sperm count and eventually leads to male infertility. Any childhood diseases in males like mumps or any undescended testes can also result in male infertility. Now, like I said, that due to even after a lot of recent advances in science and medicine, like we say, even in the 30% of the cases, we don't know what the situation is. So that is where the unexplained infertility sets in. So like I said, so females generally, any diseases which affect the ovaries, the tubes, the uterus, or the hormone system, and males, if there is any issues in the sperm, can result into infertility.
Well, thank you so much for throwing light upon this, doctor. And I think that was a very very comprehensive, very well described explanation about causes. And it's very understandable how even these causes which lead up to infertility can be very distressing for a person with respect to their physical health. But there's also definitely some sort of impact on their mental health. So based on your experiences, have any of your patients spoken to you about how this was affecting, their mental well-being or their mental health?
So whenever we are talking about infertility and mental health, I would like to compartmentalize this question.
Right.
One, if the mental health is affected due to infertility per se, number one. Mental health affected due to the causes of infertility. So
Right.
all the causes which I labeled out, the mental health affecting them. And thirdly, mental health affecting basically due to the treatment or the artificial reproductive techniques or the IVF, which we generally take into consideration. So first, we need to understand that always we are taught that infertility is kind of a vicious cycle. So there is infertility and stress. So infertility causes stress and stress causes infertility. So it's very essential to break this cycle at some point of time. And that is where we can break the stress aspect. So if we break the stress aspect, the stress will not cause infertility and the infertility will not cause stress. So it's very important to always focus on the mental well-being. Now going on to the first compartment, that is the mental health being affected due to infertility per se. Now, parenthood is one of the major transitions in the adult life for both men and women, okay? The stress of non-fulfillment of wish to have a child is associated with a lot of emotional sequelae. They are associated with anger, depression, anxiety, marital problems, sexual dysfunction, social isolation. So couples generally experience stigma. They experience a sense of loss and diminished self-esteem with this setting of infertility. Now, not only this, the relationships also may suffer in the couples. So that not only the primary relationship that is between the spouse and the partner, but also between the secondary relationship, that is the relationship between the friends and the family members. Sometimes the family members or friends tend to give some inadvertent advices, and they misguide on certain opinions that, ye karo bachcha ho jayega, wo karo bachcha ho jayega. But, sometimes it feels that why are they telling us? Sometimes couples dealing with infertility, they tend to avoid any social interactions with friends, basically who are pregnant or those who have children. So they may struggle with these anxiety related issues, and they also have sexual dysfunctions related to them. Now that is as far as infertility per se is concerned. This is how it affects the mental health. Going on to the causes of infertility affecting the mental health, that is the second compartment. Going first on the female infertility, like I said, common causes affecting female infertility. On one end of the spectrum, I said that PCOS, which is the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, people with PCOS will be shocked to know that they're 3 times more likely to experience depression and anxiety as compared to the population who don't have PCOS. Now, PCOS is generally linked to symptoms such as infertility, hirsutism. In hirsutism, we mean excessive facial hair on the body, acne, loss of scalp hair, these are the basic, what are the symptoms of PCOS, what we can say. Some people with PCOS report feeling of being frustrated and anxious about the ability to conceive. So mainly there is always a depression and anxiety as related to the fertility aspect. The second is that many of these PCOS patients are on a heavier side. So they have increase in weight. they have excessive body facial hair. So they're always very conscious about their body image. And there is always a lack of self-control over their bodies. So this is what generally affects these PCOS patients. Besides this, there is always there's also a scientific explanation that why these PCOS tend to have a lot of depression is because PCOS, there's something what happens is called, what we call it as insulin resistance. Now, in this insulin resistance itself causes a lot of depression in females. So PCOS per se, the depression is related to one, infertility, and secondly, due to the body image, because many of these PCOS patients are on a heavier side, they have excessive facial hair, they have acne, they have loss of scalp hair. So that is what makes them constantly conscious about their body image. Like I said, the second spectrum, which is the premature ovarian insufficiency or the ovarian failures. Now, it is generally basically due to the decrease, it happens in the females where they tend to progress towards the menopause a little bit early. So what happens is that the estrogen levels, the estrogen hormones tend to drop in their body. So whenever the estrogen levels drop, the symptoms related to estrogen deficiency can also precipitate depression, psychological tension, anxiety, mood liability, and loss of libido. There is again a psychological connotation with old age related to sexual life. So estrogen as a hormone is a female hormone. It is linked of being a female hormone, and it is said that it gives the femininity to the female. So there is there's a feeling of loss of femininity, attractiveness. There is a feeling that you have lost your youth. So this decreases self-esteem. Now, decreasing self-esteem again leads to various bodily integrity and mental health anxiety. Now, other causes related to other factor which can cause mental health issues in this premature ovarian insufficiency is that they have less eggs in their body. So again, these people face with infertility. Many of these females try to have IVF with their own eggs, but unfortunately they don't succeed. So they have to borrow eggs from a donor. So again, there is a mental block as far as accepting a third-party reproduction sets. The other cause which I labeled was endometriosis. So women with endometriosis are at a risk of anxiety, depression. When I was in UK, I remember that there were a lot of females of endometriosis. What happens is that these patients have a lot of pain during their periods. They have heavy periods. So they are generally given medications and pain relievers. Even certain pain relievers don't work on them. They have to take high doses of narcotics or opioids, which we call it as, rather. Not narcotics, but opioids. So morphine, like for an example. So I have seen many of these females develop so much of dependence on this morphine that even if they don't have any symptoms of endometriosis, they would walk into the OPD in London and they would just say that we have a lot of pain, we are having this endometriosis issue. They would take one shot of morphine and go back to their home. So there's again a drug dependence which is linked to this. Secondly, because of the pain, they are unable to handle their daily responsibilities. Many of them have to skip work. Many of them are not able to carry out their homely chores. Again, something related to endometriosis is pain during sex, which in our term we call it as dyspareunia. So again, it causes a little bit strain in their sexual relationship. Again, endometriosis causes infertility. So infertility is common in all these scenarios. There's always a stress related to infertility. Endometriosis as a disease causes worsening over the years. So, even if you cure or treat endometriosis, you operate on it, there is a high chances that it may recur again. So there is always a thought going on at the back of mind that I hope that I don't get this disease again because it's very painful. So there is always a sense of frustration and anxiety associated with it. Now this is as far as females are concerned. Now going on to the males. So in males, basically it's the low sperm count which we are looking at as far as infertility are concerned. So it's not that only the females are affected by this mental health block. Even the males are affected equally, but the males are generally less open about their feelings. So there is always a feeling of stress, depression, guilt, and that invariably causes psychogenic importance. They have issues as far as like erectile dysfunction because of all this stress going on in their mind. So this psychological stress invariably also hampers the sperm production, and it also has shown to decrease the sperm count. Many of these males tend to have sexual dysfunction, and there is always a higher stigma associated with male, because it probably, we are in a patriarchal society where, being a male infertile, it challenges their manlyhood, apparently. So that is where, so there is more stigma associated with the male infertility also. So that is the second compartment as well as the causes of infertility are concerned. The third compartment are the people who are accepting any form of treatment, or what we call it in our terms as artificial reproductive techniques. Now, artificial reproductive techniques is a collective term which is used for all the procedures which we generally help in the process of conception. So what we generally see that 80% of our couples conceive by conventional methods, like advising about the right time of having sex, or giving them certain medicines which forms good number of eggs in their bodies and eventually end up getting pregnant. But in these 10% of the patients who generally don't conceive, some have to undergo procedures like IUI, some have to undergo procedures like IVF. So there is always a couple presenting with infertility has this higher psychogenic distress associated with infertility because of the process of assisted reproduction technique per se. Because what we generally tell our patients is IVF is not 100% treatment. It's not that you enroll for an IVF program and you get pregnant. So there are failure rates which are seen with IVF. Now, in certain studies, they have said that people undergoing, or women generally undergoing IVF, are more depressed. They have low self-esteem, and they're less confident as compared to the control groups. This is one study. The other study showed that a woman undergoing repeated IVF who has had repeated failures, they are again more depressed and have more psychological and depressive symptoms as compared to the patients who have undergone IVF once. Many of them are affected generally by the outcomes of the treatment. Generally we put in the embryo, and the women are generally in that 14 days time, the time between the insertion of the embryo till the pregnancy test is concerned, they are always in a state of constant stress, anxiety as to what the results are going to be. So not only related to that, but also when we give certain medications, these medications are the hormone medications, which also tend to affect the mood disturbances. Secondly, there are financial constraints. So IVF is not a cheap procedure. So there is a money involved with it. So there is a lot of financial constraints. A lot of people are thinking about, okay, I'm going to spend that much money. It's again going to stress, because again, it's going to give a financial burden on them. Choice is an outcome as far as concerned. Like I said, in certain cases of premature ovarian insufficiency, where they cannot produce their own eggs, they have to borrow the eggs from the donor. So there's always a hesitation as far as taking somebody else's eggs are concerned. And again, treatment failure. Like I said, that IVF is not a 100% procedure. There are always failures associated with it, and that is why the stress is concerned. So what I have generally seen is that therapies, what we can target for these patients are basically, you need to have certain support groups. Number one is counseling, and very important counseling. So what we can see is counseling forms a very, very important tool as far as alleviating this depression and anxiety as far as infertility is concerned. And I believe counseling should be started just before starting any treatment, because that helps to break that vicious cycle of stress. So that stress will not cause infertility, and that infertility will not cause stress. So it's very important for us to break that cycle right at the start. So counseling is a very important tool. We have psychotherapies. So we have certain interpersonal therapies. We have behavioral therapies which help our patients come out of it. There are relaxation techniques like meditation, deep breathing, which have also shown promising results. Acupuncture has shown a promising result in certain cases of infertility. Now, in certain cases where this is out of the control, then we need to start off with medications. But always, whenever we are starting with medications or anti-anxiety drugs, we are always concerned is because when we are doing a fertility treatment, our main aim is to have a pregnancy and to have a baby. So it should not affect the pregnancy, and these drugs should not affect pregnancy per se. And that is what is a major concern. But yeah, so I think, the three ways, the three compartments, what stress affects is basically infertility per se, causes of infertility, and due to the procedures involved. And I feel counseling forms a major role, or a major breakthrough in breaking the stress infertility cycle.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you've kind of captured each and every thing that would kind of cause or help in treatment as well. So another question is that you might have seen so many patients, and what do you think the Indian culture plays a role in stigmatizing infertility for these patients?
So in an Indian society, there is a huge part which a female plays is, the female plays a main part and is having a baby. The main aim of marriage of female is to have a baby. Now, it's generally a misconception that only the lower socioeconomic status or the lower socioeconomic strata have this. No, that's a myth, or that's a misconception. We have also seen with higher incomes and higher educated groups even having this stigma associated with female infertility, and there is a social implication related to them also. Now, there is something what we call as that childlessness. Now, childlessness is defined as a woman who is currently married for more than 5 years and probably has not got pregnant, has not terminated pregnancy, has never used contraception, and still has not been able to have a baby. Uh, as far as we are talking about the Indian culture as such, now, whenever we are talking about the Indian scenario, the story, goes back to our Vedas. The story of sage Agastya from Mahabharata tells us that why we are so obsessed with children. Besides the social factor that there should be someone to take care of you, there is a religious importance of a child, which they say in Mahabharata. Now, each individual is bound by something which is called as a dharma to produce a child, and the child has to perform a ceremony which is called as a shraddha, which is offering obligations to the ancestors, and that is why the child is called as a dharma putra. Now, you know, failure of performing this shraddha will probably, they say that it kind of gives a bitterness to the ancestors in the Pitraloka. So the ancestors who are there, who have had their heavenly abode, they get they are not, they don't attain moksha because of that. So it's always been there right from the mythology. Not only about that, when we're talking even the donor sperms. Now, there have been time, even they have discussed in Mahabharata, that when a man could not produce his child, he was given a benefit of doubt to allow to marry again, and to probably have a child again. Now, there is a king which was called as Vichavirya. His mother invited sage Vyas to have children for a widow daughter-in-law, but the biological father still remained Vichavirya. So it has been going on since time memorial. So it's nothing that it's been there in our system right now. It has been passed on from the scriptures. It's passed on from the text. So obviously our Indian society has been always scripture bound. It has always been it's always been a patriarchal society. So there's always been a pressure and a burden on a woman to have children. So not only about that, when we're talking about an important thing like surrogacy. Take the story of Krishna, that when Kans imprisoned Devaki and her husband Vasudeva, because they knew that that the child coming out would result into his destruction. The gods intervened and transferred this the 7 fetus into the womb of Devaki, womb from Devaki to Rohini, and that is how the child Krishna came into being. So infertility has been right through our scriptures, and it's giving us ideas right from the start. Whether it's right from infertility, whether it's accepting donor sperms, whether it's surrogacy. So it's always been there in our system right from start. So that is why our Indian society is always been stimulated towards that.
Right. Thank you so much for facing it back, and kind of giving a very, very wholesome description about this entire, situation. The next thing is, again, because of the way society perceives infertility. Because of that, again, I think, couples or maybe individuals, they refrain from sharing their struggles or talking about it openly. And I think at that point of time, emotional support, again, is so important.
Yeah.
So, and family, friends can play a major role in the same. So how do you think, a person can, support someone who might be experiencing it, whether with respect to infertility per se, or if they're undergoing some sort of treatment? So what role does, like family or friends, play?
See, absolutely. See, what happens is, like I said, that a person or a female who is suffering from infertility, she's going through a lot of things in her mind. Like I said, that there is a stress factor related to infertility per se. There are stress factors related to the causes of infertility, and the stress factor related to to accepting a procedure. So it's very important for first of all, the primary partner, or the spouse should play a very strong role in probably supporting the female if the female infertility is concerned. And likewise, if a male infertility is concerned, it's very important that the first support or the first support system should come from your spouse. I've seen a lot of couples who they say that the husbands, they generally they don't even do their semen analysis. They don't do their test. Like what we say is, when we are investigating female infertility, there are battery of tests to be done. Like I said, there's ovaries, there's tubes, there's uterus, there's hormones. So they have a long list of investigations to be done. Whereas in the case of male infertility, there's a simple semen analysis to be done. So I've seen a lot of couples, just the female walking into the clinic and they say that, doctor, you can just test me because my husband said that, if everything of mine is normal, then I will do my semen test, which is not true. And probably, if everything comes out normal, that female goes through a blood test, that female goes through painful procedures like HSGs, laparoscopies, and eventually we find out that the cause is lying in the husband. So that should not be the case. So infertility is, like I said, that it's a couple issue. So, first support should be coming from your life partner. So secondly, when we're talking about family, again, it's very important for us to judge that, that woman or a man who's suffering from infertility is going through a lot of stress. And like I said, the stress causes infertility. So if we are constantly impinging on them that, you have to do this procedure, you do this, you eat this, then you'll get pregnant, that is not true. First thing is you need to break that stress cycle. Because infertility is a problem which a lot of females might not come out very early. They'll try for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then eventually, when the things are not going right, then they'll come to the infertility specialist. That also they are a little bit hesitant, whether to go or not, because there's always a sense of the males tend to have a sense of shame that I hope the problem is not with me. The females sometimes think that, oh God, if I go to an infertility consultant, what if I'm infertile? Probably will the family or will the husband accept me? So it's very important that the support comes from first of all, your husband. Your family should be supportive. And secondly, I would encourage these females to come out to infertility specialists. Infertility right now we are in 21st century, where science is advanced through leaps and bounds. Now, initially when first IVF started way back, almost 35 years back, the success rates were in just single digits, like 5-6%. Now it has, stepped up to like 50%, 55% success rates. So we have come to a stage where we can give pregnancy. There are recent advances in sciences. We are getting good results. So I actually encourage these women to, come out of the barriers and, seek some support or seek some guidance, because not many women are, because of their sense of being ashamed, they don't tend to take these treatments. So it's like, it's your other health related problem. It's like your blood pressure, it's your diabetes. Whenever you're diagnosed with such conditions, you would surely go to a doctor. So why not infertility? Because infertility is treatable in most of the cases. So that is second thing, that they have to be open. They have to speak up to their infertility consultants. Thirdly, people like you, that counseling forms a very important aspect, and that is where psychologists and psychiatrists play a very important role in as far as counseling factors concerned. Like I stressed that, it's very important that it is through you that we can get results. If you can break that stress infertility barrier, we can give results. Like stress invariably is going to cause them to have poor response in their IVF. It can also cause stress can also negatively impact the sperm count. So it's very important that that stress is broken by the psychologist and the psychiatrist. So that this is the way where there should be like a constant support system from all the places, like from the family, from the doctors, from the psychologists. Then probably what we can do is we can give a better result.
Okay, so thank you, sir, for letting us know how we can get support from like very different sources. So it is like, as an entire society, we all need to kind of move forward and support the individuals who are facing problems with infertility. And another question is that because you've been in the field for such a long time, do you know that if there are any support groups, offline or online, which people can access to, or talk to other people who are going through similar things, or something like that, that is available in India?
So according to what we call it as whenever we are doing in IVF practices or infertility practice, our laboratories or our centers are generally linked to what we call it as the Indian Council of Medical Research. And they have formed a very nice clause that, whenever you're setting up a center, you should have a clinical psychologist or a psychologist attached to your center. So whenever we are talking, whenever we are discussing a treatment protocol with a patient, whenever a patient walks into a clinic, it's very important that we always schedule a meeting with a psychologist simultaneously. So in cases wherever we see a patient, suppose of PCOS, and if she is having a long-standing infertility, and we have advised her an IVF procedure, so we will run through the procedure with her. but simultaneously will fix up an appointment with with her clinical psychologist, and probably he or she will speak to the patient about what will be the psychological implications, what basically they can expect from the treatment, because it becomes very difficult for us as as a clinician to cover all the points in one go, whereas the clinical psychologist and psychologist can actually give them the peace of mind. They can actually sit, speak to them, they can clear their doubts. So yeah, there are a lot of there are as I said, that each and every IVF center does have their own clinical psychologists as far as uh, support is concerned. Simultaneously, we have a lot of NGOs which are again there, like a lot of mental. Right now, we are seeing a lot of mental health coming into the limelight after Sushant Singh Rajput's case, and we have a lot of people coming out and spreading the awareness that we are there for you. Speak up, or always talk to us. There are posts which are coming up on Facebook saying that if you ever feel alone, we are always there for you. So there are a lot of support groups which I feel not only coming from the organizations but also from personal, from a personal front. Suppose a lot of my friends we are coming out, saying that if anyone has any issues related to the mental health, or probably if they're feeling depressed or feeling anxious, or they really want to open up or talk about certain things, sometimes infertility, being an infertile couple, generally they don't voice out their opinions. They really look out to someone to talk to. So people like us can step in and say that listen, we are there for you. So if you have any problem, you can speak to us. You can just spread that message saying that we are just a phone call away. So not only, like I said, that the clinical psychologist which is attached to an IVF center where they have to go to a doctor and approach that psychologist, but many a times we get calls directly from the patients for just that mental support. And I think half of the battle is won when you win the confidence of the patient as far as infertility is concerned. To give a positive response or positive result in infertility, the patient should feel positive about it. The patient is constantly in that sense of I don't know whether this will work out or not, and that situation will continue, and she will, and probably even if there's a negative result, she will try to keep that thing in the mind. Whenever and this is what I'm talking about, a personal experience and from my practice, people who are bindas and they are positive, that listen, I'll get pregnant, and they do get pregnant. Like I had one of these couples when we generally put in two embryos, and we just had one embryo for her. And we said that probably, do you want to undergo another IVF cycle, because that will probably give you maybe a better success of having a pregnancy, or you would like to continue with this embryo where the success is still there but not very great. So she told me, listen doctor, I'm quite positive and I think that I'm going to have a baby, and I have that in my mind. And we did an embryo transfer for that patient, and that patient conceived. So that the positive environment, I think the positive environment in the mind absolutely accelerates a good well-being of the patient, and it gives good results. So rather than like I said, that there are support groups, there are various right now there are a lot of NGOs which are coming out saying that we are there for help. There are a lot of call centers, there are helplines that we are just a call away. But I feel that even on a personal front, where sometimes when a support coming from a person who is unknown or unseen may not be valid that enough, rather than a support coming from your friend or from your acquaintance or from your family member. So if your friend gives you an advice and your friend says that, listen, I'm there to help you out if there is any problem, or you can speak out to me and I'll be able to help you out, that would rather make a more positive impact on that patient. So that is what I really want to focus on, is that you have to be quite open about and supportive towards your friends and towards your family. And if you know anyone who is going through this treatment, or probably going through this whole process of IVF, you can just say that, listen, if you want any help, if you need anything in the middle of the night, just pick up the phone and I'll be there for you. So that works.
Right. Very encouraging that to know that like IVF centers and all these places have a psychologist, and the fact that mental health is given a lot of importance. And again, I think having a psychologist or a therapist on board, as well as getting the required emotional support from family and friends, can, I think, really, really help, someone who's going through it, cope with it better. So, doctor, moving on to our next question. So you did mention what PCOS is, but how is PCOS different from PCOD? And are there what are the common myths that are linked to these?
So firstly, just for a correction, it's not PCOD, it's PCOS. And the reason being that
Okay,
it started off with being a PCOD. So
right.
it was labeled as a disease, polycystic ovarian disease.
Hmm.
So people said that, listen, it's not a disease, it's just syndrome. It's because it's just a group of certain symptoms which is affecting a patient. So you can't
Right.
label this as a disease. So the PCOD term has been shifted from PCOD to being PCOS. So now what we generally use in our clinical practice is PCOS, which is a
Mhm.
polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's not a disease because it's just a group of symptoms like menstrual irregularities, increased male hormone, and probably clinical picture of polycystic ovaries on the ultrasound. And that is when we generally, if we see any two of these three positive findings, we tend to label the patient as PCOS. Now, PCOS has been a very common gynecological complaint with a lot of people walking into the OPD, and I think in one OPD, every third or fourth patient is a patient of PCOS. There are a lot of myths surrounding PCOS. Number one myth is a very important myth is that if you have PCOS, you can't get pregnant, which is completely false.
Mm.
Now, PCOS is a common cause of infertility, yes. Now, it is a hormone problem which is going to affect the release of the eggs, and probably the eggs will not get fertilized, and probably this may result into infertility. But take a deep breath, because uh, with certain hormones, with certain drugs, with changes in certain lifestyle, we can actually control this PCOS and get our patients pregnant. Now, a lot of these women are generally what I've seen is a lot of these women are given a doomsday scenario saying that that listen, you've got a PCOS, it's very difficult for you to get conceived. So I can't tell you, and PCOS is a common condition which affects not only, we don't see it at 25, 30 years of age. We are
Mm.
seeing girls of 18, 19, 20 also coming up with PCOS. So many of these girls at 18, they're just going to jump their loops. They're told that you're having PCOS. I think you should get married fast, because if you don't get married fast, you're not going to have you're going to have a difficulty in conceiving, which I think is a big myth. So PCOS treatment is different for a woman who is not married, and it's different for a woman who's married. Or rather a woman who is desirous of a child. So first, number one myth that if you're PCOS, you cannot conceive is completely false. You can get conceived with PCOS. Yes, you may have a difficulty in conceiving. That also, not all PCOS will have a difficulty in conceiving. Some of the PCOS may have infertility attached to them, but it is one of the most commonest treatable causes of infertility, like I can put it, because if you're a PCOS, you have a higher chances of getting pregnancy. Why I call this is because I call PCOD as a jackpot disease. The jackpot being that you have a lot of eggs in your body, but somehow these eggs are not growing, or somehow these eggs are not rupturing, and that is why you're not getting pregnant. The good thing is that there are eggs, but due to some hormonal disturbances, they're not being able to grow, or they're not being able to rupture, and that is why the pregnancy is not forming. So by correction of these hormonal situations in the body, by giving certain medicines or by doing certain fertility procedures, we can get them pregnant. So that is number one myth as far as PCOS is concerned. Second myth, which is linked with PCOS, is that if you have a PCOS picture on your sonography, a lot of females say that, oh God, I'm diagnosed with PCOS. Now I'm going to start the growth of hair over my chin, over my lips, and I'm going to have a lot of hair over my face. Now, hirsutism, or what we call it as increased male hormone in the body, and which shows as features with abnormal hair growth in the women, be it on the lips, upper lip, chin, on the chest, uh, is one of the criteria for PCOS. Like I said, to label a woman PCOS, you need to fulfill two of the three criteria. One is the irregular periods, one is hirsutism, that is excessive hair growth, and third is polycystic ovarian pictures. So, even if you don't have hirsutism, and if you have irregular periods and polycystic ovaries, you're still a PCOS. So even if you have excessive hair growth in the body, we have a lot of treatments, medications. There are certain contraceptive pills which we can give, which have anti-androgen. That is, they decrease the male hormones in the body. There are a lot of hormonal medications which have come into the market, which we can give, which can prevent hair growth in these females. And again, we have a lot of aesthetic and a lot of cosmetic procedures, like we have hair removal, laser hair removal, which can be given to these PCOS patients. Now, again, a third misconception or a myth related to PCOS is that if that a female comes to me saying that, doctor, I have irregular cycles. My periods are not my periods are not regular. I think I have PCOS. That is not true. All irregular periods is not PCOS. That is again a common myth, which a lot of female coming in the age of 24, 25 say that, doctor, I'm getting my periods after 3 months. I think I'm having PCOS. We cannot just label the patient as PCOS on the basis only of her menstrual irregularities. Like I said, she has to fulfill 2 of the 3 criteria. Now, some females are not aware about the menstrual cycle. Firstly, they don't know what abnormality is. Even if a 2 or 3 day shift here and there is still considered as normal. That's what the patients need to actually know about. Even if a 7-day plus minus here and there, they feel that they are having irregular periods, which is not true. The periods are still regular. Now, there are other causes which may result into irregularity of periods. That is probably stress, probably thyroid disorders. There are uterine fibroids. There are increased certain hormones like prolactins. And I mean, these are some of the causes which can result into delayed cycles. Many young girls preparing for the exams, there's a lot of stress, and they say that, doctor, we have our exams due, but I've missed my periods. I don't know what to do. I'm PCOS, which is not true. So basically, you have to visit your gynecologist and need to talk to your doctor. Even if you have irregular periods, that doesn't mean that you have PCOS. Another misconception or a myth is that I have had 2 or 3 children. I'm diagnosed with PCOS. I don't need to worry about it because I have completed my family. That's another myth. PCOS, one of the complication of PCOS is infertility, but that's not the only complication. Like I said, PCOS is a condition which results into insulin resistance. So a lot of these women have a higher incidence of developing diabetes later on in their lifetime. They have, again, a higher chance of developing blood pressure. They have poor cholesterol controls. They have depression, they anxiety, and overall, they might be resulting into certain cancer of the uterus, that is endometrial cancer, because of unopposed estrogen which is acting on the uterus can cause endometrial cancer. So it is very important that just because you're diagnosed as PCOS and you have completed your family, you just have to stop worrying, and that's not true. Now, another myth or misconception concerned with PCOS is if I'm PCOS, I'm going to gain weight, I'm going to be obese, I'm going to be overweight. Now, overweight or obese PCOS is only one part of PCOS. There's something which is the other part of PCOS, which we call it as a thin, lean PCOS, which is ideally more difficult to manage than that of the obese PCOS. So it's not the obese ones which you are worried about, it's the thinner ones which you are worried about more. Because when we give medications or when we give certain hormones to grow their eggs, the thinner ones tend to over-respond and they tend to go into complications much earlier than that of the obese ones. So it's not necessary that all PCOS will be obese and vice versa. Not all obese are going to be PCOS. Now, another misconception is that PCOS women can lose weight very easily. Okay, and it's very easy to lose weight. PCOS, if you have a PCOS, 5 to 7% of reduction of the weight is ideal. But a lot of our PCOS patients, they tell us that, doctor, we are following this diet, we are following the exercise, but somehow I'm not being able to lose my weight. I don't know what to do. So it's very difficult as to, lose the weight in PCOS is concerned. The other misconception revolving PCOS is that if I have PCOS, I have to be on the birth control pill for my life. So, it's not always true. Yes, if you are unmarried, if you are unregulated PCOS, we can give you birth control pills. But that is only a short-term management. Whenever you put in PCOS, management of PCOS, if you just type in Google, and the first point which will come is lifestyle modification, which is very, very important. So the main aim of giving birth control pills or to regularize those periods in those 2-3 months is to give you a leeway to help you inculcate those lifestyle practices in your routine and probably get those things sorted out so that pills give you a temporary 3 or 4 month regular period so that you can lose your little bit of weight. You can take a little bit of time in your diet and you can, get that PCOS under control. Right. So these are the common myths what basically surround PCOS.
Oh, wow, that was like, each and every point made so much sense because I think even I didn't know a lot of these things because especially when you're Googling all of this, I mean, we have like just been Googling all of this and every time it's just that we come to know all of these things are just like, even when we're looking at proper sites, they would not give us such detailed information. So thank you so much for this. And I think you made a point about lifestyle changes. So what are some changes that you would suggest that, people can, take into consideration while maybe not developing PCOS, or maybe if they're in the stages of developing PCOS or something like that?
Major, whenever we are talking about lifestyle changes, it's very important that we focus on, probably first, number one is the main important thing, is the two things which we focus on is diet and exercise. Okay, these are the two major lifestyle changes which we want the patients of PCOS to inculcate in their routine practices. Now, when we're talking about diet, there are basically three types of diets which we are generally stressing out on. Is one is the low glycemic index diet, second is the anti-inflammatory diet, and third is what we call as a DASH diet, which is a dietary approaches to stop hypertension, DASH diet. So first is the low glycemic diet. And low glycemic diet, what it does is that these are the food which generally digests in your body slowly. So they do not cause the insulin levels to rise to a very drastic levels, and that is they do not increase the level of carbohydrates in your body. So the main culprit in PCOS is the carbohydrate-rich food, which we need to cut down in the diet. Okay, so a low glycemic index diet are the diets basically which are not having carbohydrates in them, like whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds are the basic components of these diets. There are certain anti-inflammatory diets, like we have fatty fish, which has omega-3 fatty acids. We have certain berries, which have a lot of antioxidants in them, which are generally these anti-inflammatory diets. The NASH diet, which are the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, are rich in certain omega-3 good fats or good fatty acids, like we say is fish, certain fish which have omega-3 fatty acids, certain vegetables. So basically what foods to add is the high fiber vegetables. Secondly is lean protein and anti-inflammatory foodstuffs. So basically there are foodstuffs like your cauliflowers, your sprouts, your bell peppers, beans, almonds, berries are the other foodstuffs which you can take into consideration as far as these are the low glycemic index foodstuff. The foodstuffs which are anti-inflammatory are tomatoes, kale, spinach, almonds, nuts, olive oils, and these are the basic foodstuff which you have to inculcate in your diet. The foodstuff which you have to avoid in your diet, again, like I said, the carbohydrates, since it's a main culprit, the foods which are high in carbohydrates have to be out of your diet. Any sugary snacks, any carbonated drinks like your sodas, your colas should be out, and foods which promote inflammation, that is your red meats, should be out of your diet. So anything which is like your white breads, your pastries, your sugary desserts, foodstuffs containing a lot of maida, pastas should be taken into control. Now, like I said, that sugar is the main form of carbohydrate. So any foodstuff which is rich in sucrose, dextrose, and corn syrup should be avoided from the diet. Now, when we're talking about this is as far as the diet is concerned. The second important aspect of lifestyle changes, which we generally say is basically is exercise, or probably to have a proactive lifestyle. Now, exercise is not mainly you just go join a gym, hit the gym and start exercising. It's just daily physical body movements. Now, this can reduce insulin resistance. It's said that even a 150 minutes per week of exercise, or probably a brisk walk, is also quite beneficial as far as controlling PCOS is concerned. Now, when I mean by walk, a brisk walk, it means a brisk walk. It's not like strolling with your mobile and talking to someone on the phone. So if you have a brisk walk, if you're jogging, that or a probable something like aerobic exercises, cycling, swimming, can also help you control tide over this PCOS. Like I said, it's not necessary to just hit the gym and join the gym and lift up weights to get control of PCOS. Now, like I said, that 5 to 7% of the reduction of weight can also help you first ovulate better. It can regularize your cycles. If you are planned in for an IVF or any treatment modality, you can still have a positive response in the cycle, and probably even your weight, which is again a main problem issue as far as PCOS is concerned, can be controlled.
So I think thank you so much for really putting that out so well, and I think it's a very well described like description about changes that one can make. So Doctor, moving on to like almost the last segment of our session, we will be touching upon the aspect of having a baby. So again, as you had mentioned, the parenthood is an important transition for a lot of people, and the common notion is that after you have a baby, it's everyone's really happy. It's supposed to be a very joyous occasion, but a lot of times couples can experience negative emotions. So how do you think, so could you throw some light upon this, where having a baby can sometimes affect a person negatively?
So, whenever you are having a baby, or whenever you're expecting to have a baby, or rather when you have had a baby, it's very important that you keep a proper balance of your emotional health as well as your physical health, because it's going to be a whole new world. It's going to be a different scenario altogether of being a new parent. You have entered into a different phase of your life. Now, it is a complete life-changing experience which you have ever had. So there is a feeling of joy, achievement. There is a certain sense of relief that I've just tick marked one aspect of my life which I had to do, you know after getting a pregnancy. So, but the life after having a baby is completely different from what you expect. It's not always that if I have a pregnancy, my baby is just going to be there. I'm going to play with the baby, and it's going to be all okay. So caring for the baby during the first year of the life, rather for the first few months, is quite a demanding job. It involves a lot of sleepless nights. Certain babies in their initial times, they tend to have something which is called as colic, which the babies are just having excessive crying episodes, and you basically end up not knowing what to do, because you can't see your baby crying, and you just can't do anything because the baby cannot speak to you and tell you what exactly the baby is having. So there might be feeding problems, but there are certain situations where there are not enough milk production, as far as pregnant women are concerned. There is always a stress related to, why am I not being able to produce that much of milk. Sometimes that stress can also decrease milk production supply, and that is when the frustration sets in, that I'm not being able to feed my baby, I'm going to starve my baby. So that again comes into a picture. So it's very important that you have again a constant support first from your partner, and again from your family members. Many women have symptoms of depression, anxiety in the later parts of their pregnancy, which we'll be touching upon, which we call it as postpartum blues, postpartum depressions. So whenever you're stressed, I think you should always confront to your friend or relative. You should be taking breaks. Whenever you're talking about, generally what happens is, we are used to a sleep cycle of 7 to 8 hours in the night, which is completely broken when you have a baby. You have to get up every 2-3 hours to feed the baby. So it's very important that you target on certain points, and you try to get your stress levels down by forming a routine. So make up for your missed sleeps. So try to, if you're a working mother, make sure that you sleep over the weekends, you get more rest over the weekends. Sometimes it's not only the sleep, sometimes just lying down and de-stressing yourself, just by listening to music, or watching a favorite series on TV can help you de-stress. Certain women indulge in caffeine, which I think is wrong. So you should not be indulging in a lot of caffeine, because it may give you a temporary sense of wakefulness, but on a longer term it's going to give you a lot of lethargy. Share your work with the partner. So sometimes, obviously a male can't breastfeed, but besides that he can do everything. So when there is a burping of the baby which is required, or probably if the baby is on bottle, the male partner can feed the bottle to the baby after the woman is breastfed. So till that time the woman can rest. If there is any sterilization of the bottles and all, that can be taken by the male counterpart. So I think that ways, that's a major transition. So it's always a mixed feeling whenever you're having a baby. It's always, I would not say that it's depression and mood swings and probably postpartum psychosis and blue is just one very minor part of it. Mostly having a pregnancy is probably associated with a sense of joy and a sense of achievement. But then once you get the baby, you are constantly under stress, because you don't know whether you're doing the right things. You don't know whether you're going on the right track, because the baby can't talk to you. So you don't know whether you're feeding the baby well. Sometimes you feel that, am I starving the baby? Am I not giving enough feeds? Or probably, am I overfeeding the baby? Or sometimes when the baby is crying, so am I doing anything wrong? So that is where, you need a constant support. You need support from someone, from your elders, from your mother or from your mother-in-law who has undergone this process, who knows, who have taken care of children before. So they can guide you through this process, that, you can do this, you can do that. Your male partner can, step in and do the, distribute the work amongst themselves. So yeah, I think having a pregnancy, or rather having a baby, is kind of a mixed feelings. So there is more of positive rather than negative, I would say. So yeah.
Thank you, sir, for letting us know that there is a positive and a bright side to obviously having a baby too. But as we still spoke about, you did talk about a little bit of postpartum blues, postpartum depression. So can you tell us, like, what are some signs that parents need to be aware of, that I might have depression, or I might have those blues or something like that.
So generally, postpartum psychiatric disorders can be divided basically into three categories. One is postpartum blues, second is postpartum psychosis, and third is postpartum depression. Now, all three are very different with different severities. Postpartum blue is a very common scenario which we see also in our clinical practices, and it generally affects almost 300 to 750 per 1,000 women. And it is generally seen in the first few days or first few weeks after pregnancy. And as you know, as you're with your baby, as you spend time with your baby, it tends to wean out. Postpartum depression, on the other hand, can start soon after the childbirth, and it can continue for a longer period of time, and also probably cause aftermath depression, if not treated. Now, generally, fortunately, the incidence of postpartum depression is quite less. It's generally 100 to 150 per 1,000 births. So it's kind of a little bit less which is seen. Now, postpartum depression is something which we really need to look into because it can predispose to chronic and recurrent depressions later on in the lifetime. So it's very important to target this and treat these conditions because this will be a long-standing problem. Now, what we have seen that not only it affects the mother, but it also affects the child. Because a woman, or rather a female with a postpartum depression, then a child who is born to a female having a postpartum depression would have, greater cognitive, behavioral, and interpersonal problems as far as is concerned as compared to a child who was born to a mother who is non-depressed. Now, what are the signs and symptoms which we need to be looking out for? Is first is the post baby blues or postpartum blues, what we generally call about. Is basic. There are very mild mood swings, anxiety, sadness, irritability, crying, reduced concentration, appetite problems, and trouble sleeping. So like I said, that having a baby initially is kind of a new environment altogether. Sometimes our mind is not very much trained to get into that situation altogether, and we are exposed to taking care of ourselves, now taking care of this new being. So sometimes you're just overjoyed, sometimes you don't know what to do, sometimes you get very emotional, sometimes your baby cries, and I've seen a lot of mothers saying that when my baby cries, I just feel like crying by myself. So that's a little earlier part of postpartum blues. Now, postpartum depression, on the other hand, generally may present as postpartum blues earlier, but the signs and symptoms are very intense and very severe, and they take a little longer to go away, and it can also persist after years after birth. So there are obviously the symptoms may be same, the signs and symptoms may be same, but there is depression, mood swings, there is excessive crying. Secondly, very importantly, is there is difficulty in bonding with your baby. You don't feel that attachment towards your baby. There is a withdrawal from your family and your friends. You don't feel like talking to your partner. You don't feel like talking to your family. Either there is loss of appetite or there is increased appetite. Either you sleep a lot or either you don't sleep. Another thing, what is an important condition, what we call it as anhedonia, is that there is reduced interest in pleasure and activity. So having a pregnancy or having a baby is a joyous thing. So completely, anhedonia and disinterest can result into this feeling of hopelessness, severe anxiety. And then it is postpartum psychosis, which is again a rare condition, and signs and symptoms are very severe. There is confusion, disorientation, obsessive thoughts about your baby, hallucinations, sleep depression, paranoia can also set in. So these are the postpartum psychosis may lead to later life-threatening disorders, and it requires medical treatment. So that is what I want to say, that basically they are the three major psychiatric disorders which you can basically focus on as far as psychiatric disorders in pregnancy are concerned, which is postpartum blues, postpartum depression, and your postpartum psychosis. And early diagnosis and treatment, I think, is the mainstay key to diagnose what is postpartum, the difference between a postpartum blue, depression, and psychosis, so that you don't miss out on any and you don't miss out treating them.
So thank you so much, Doctor, for really explaining each of those, like three aspects very well. So I think with this, we come to a close to the session. And I'd really like to thank you on behalf of the team of Magic Shop for really taking the time out and agreeing to be a part of the Expert series. And I think there's so much that we have gained throughout this entire session with respect to our understanding about reproductive health and its relation with mental health, as well as a lot of clarification. As I mentioned, like a lot of loopholes in our understanding. So I think a lot was clarified in the session today. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Sachi and Ruhi, for having me.
Thank
So,
you, sir.
and to our listeners and viewers, you could drop in any sort of questions. If you all do have questions related to this episode, you can either send us a message or drop it in the comments. And we will also be mentioning Dr. Mistri's Instagram handle in the description below, so you can go and give it a follow, because I think Doctor has explained a lot of concepts related to reproductive health. There are a lot of videos and posts which explain this in a very simplified and very engaging manner. So do go and give it a follow. And so I think with that we end today's session. So thank you so much, Doctor, once again.
Thank you, Sachi. Thank you, Ruhi. It was a pleasure
Thank
being
you,
here.
sir.
Thank you.